My name is Renata Voss. I was 27 when I learned that love, in some families, comes with an expiration date stamped in someone else's handwriting. It was a Tuesday when the message arrived. Not a phone call, a text sent at 9:14 in the morning, as if my stepmother had timed it between errands. Just a heads up, we're keeping Dad's birthday small this year. Family only. 3 words did the damage. Family only. As if I had been something else for the last 19 years. I read it twice standing in my kitchen, coffee going cold in my hand, sunlight cutting a flat gold line across the counter. I remember the silence of the apartment pressing in around me, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly loud. I did not cry. I have never been a crier in the moment. My grief arrives late, like a letter mailed to the wrong address that eventually finds its way back. I am a logistics coordinator by trade, the person people call when a shipment vanishes between 2 ports and nobody can explain why. I am good at finding the missing piece. I am not, apparently, good at noticing when I had already become the missing piece in my own father's life. The trip had been my idea. 6 months of planning. A family reunion in Portugal, my father's childhood home country, a place he'd talked about since I was small, always in that wistful tone people use for things they think they'll never actually do. I had built the whole itinerary myself. The coastal house in Abydos, the vineyard afternoon, the boat out past the cliffs at Nazar. $40,000, most of it mine, some contributed by my father's siblings, all of it built around one promise, that for 10 days, our fractured, patched-together family would sit at the same table without flinching. I had not accounted for the possibility that I would be the one asked not to come to the table first. I called my father that evening. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice performing an ease I didn't believe. "Oh, sweetheart, it's not like that. Denise just wants something quiet this year." I listened to him choose his wife's comfort over the truth, and something in me went very still, the way water goes still right before it starts to move. I didn't argue. I said, "Okay, Dad. Happy early birthday," and hung up and sat with my phone in my lap for a long time, watching the screen dim and go dark, then light up again when I touched it out of habit, like checking a wound to see if it still hurts. It still hurt. It was going to keep hurting. But somewhere underneath the hurt, something else was forming. Quiet, deliberate, patient. Not a plan for revenge. Not yet. Just the first cold clarity of a woman realizing she had spent 19 years building bridges that only she was ever asked to walk across alone. I opened my laptop. The Portugal folder was still there, labeled in my own handwriting font. Voss Family Reunion. Do not lose this one. I stared at it for a long time before I closed the lid. Not yet, I thought. But soon. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay in the dark reconstructing my whole childhood like a woman going through old boxes in an attic, pulling things out one by one, turning them over to see what they actually were instead of what I had always assumed. My mother died when I was 6. Pneumonia, then complications, then a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and wilting flowers. My father remarried 4 years later. Denise, a woman with sharp elbows and a laugh that always seemed to be measuring the room for approval. I was 10. I wanted, desperately, for it to work. I called her nothing at first, then eventually Denise. Never anything warmer, because the warmer words felt like betrayals of a woman who could no longer object. There were small things over the years I'd folded neatly into the drawer marked misunderstanding. The Christmas, where my stocking was smaller than her biological children's. The graduation dinner, where I was seated at the end of the table, near the kitchen door, while she rearranged place cards for the photos. The wedding, hers to my father, where I stood in the back because family photos meant her side. I had always told myself these were coincidences, or my own oversensitivity, because the alternative, that I had simply never been counted, was too large a thing to hold. In the morning I made coffee I didn't drink and opened my email. There were 3 separate messages from my Aunt Colette, my father's sister, forwarded excitedly, with subject lines like, "Can't wait." And only 6 weeks. She had booked her flight already. My cousin Theo had sent me a photo of the guidebook he'd bought. Everyone was moving toward Portugal like a tide going out, unaware that the shoreline had shifted underneath them. I thought about simply absorbing it, going to Portugal anyway, letting my father have his small, quiet birthday with Denise, showing up for the trip as though nothing had happened, because that was the pattern. Swallow it, smile, keep the peace, be the bigger person, be the understanding one, be the one who doesn't make things difficult. I thought about all the years I had been the one who doesn't make things difficult. I opened the shared trip document instead. My name was listed as organizer, primary contact, and, because I had wanted to be generous, payer of record for the 2 non-refundable deposits, the coastal house and the vineyard afternoon. Both were under my card. Both had cancellation windows that I checked with a strange, steadying calm, were still open for another 11 days. I didn't cancel anything that morning. I want to be honest about that, because this isn't a story about a woman flying into a decision. I sat with the thought the way you sit with a bruise, pressing it lightly now, and then just to measure how much it still hurts, until I understood what I actually wanted. I didn't want to punish my father. I wanted, for the first time in my adult life, to stop making myself smaller so that his marriage could stay comfortable. That evening I texted Denise back, 4 days late for words. Understood. Enjoy the day. Then I opened the folder again. There is a particular kind of quiet that settles over a decision once you've actually made it, different from the noisy quiet of indecision. I felt it now, sitting at my kitchen table with the trip documents spread in front of me like evidence in a case I hadn't realized I'd been building. I want to be clear about something because I think it matters. I never once considered telling anyone what Denise had said. Not my aunt, not my cousins, not even my father's oldest friend, Marcus, who had always treated me like a niece rather than an inconvenience. This wasn't going to be a story about airing grievances at a group dinner, tears and accusations over the bread basket. That kind of confrontation gives the pain away for free, spends it all at once for a moment of spectacle. I wanted something quieter, something that simply let the truth arrive on its own schedule. I called the property manager in Abydos first, a kind-voiced woman named Sophia, who remembered me from our earlier calls about the kitchen's cooking facilities. I told her, honestly, that our family's plans had changed and I needed to cancel within the refund window. She was gracious. The deposit, $12,000, would be returned to my card within 10 business days. Then the vineyard. Then the boat charter at Nazar, which had a smaller but still meaningful penalty-free window closing that Friday. I did not touch the flights. Those were booked individually by each family member and were not mine to unmake. I want to be precise about this, because precision mattered to me. I wasn't trying to strand anyone in an airport or leave my aunt out of pocket for plane tickets she'd already paid for. I was only unbuilding the parts of the trip that I alone had built, the parts that existed because of my labor, my research, my card, my 100 hours of planning. It felt less like revenge and more like retrieving something. Like realizing you'd lent someone your coat in a snowstorm and simply asking, quietly, for it back. My hands were steady on the keyboard, which surprised me. I had expected trembling, some dramatic physical betrayal of my own resolve. Instead, there was a strange, settled clarity, the kind I imagine sailors feel when a storm finally breaks and the water goes glassy and still. I drafted a group message to send once everything was finalized, not accusatory, not even explanatory, just factual. Hi all, due to a change in plans, I've had to cancel the house and the vineyard/boat bookings I was holding. Sorry for the short notice. Please let me know if you'd like the property contacts to rebook independently. No mention of Denise. No mention of the birthday. Let the cancellation speak for itself, and let anyone curious enough to ask the question find their own way to the answer, the way I had had to find my own way to it, alone, for 19 years. I sent it at 6:47 that evening, then closed my laptop, and for the first time in days, I ate an actual meal, sitting at my own table, in my own quiet. The first response came from my Aunt Colette, 11 minutes after I sent the message. Oh no, everything okay? What happened? I didn't answer right away. I let the question sit unanswered in the thread, the way Denise's message had sat unanswered in my life for years before I understood what it actually meant. I wasn't punishing Colette. I simply didn't have a small enough answer to give her yet, and I refused to hand her a large one dressed up as something casual. By the next morning, The thread had unraveled into a dozen private messages. Theo asking if I was all right, my Uncle Paul asking whether the deposits were truly non-recoverable, my father, notably, saying nothing at all. That silence told me more than any of the messages. He knew. Of course he knew. Denise would have told him the trip had collapsed the moment the group chat started buzzing, and his silence was the sound of a man deciding, again, that the easiest path was the quiet one. 2 days later, he called. I let it ring 3 times before I answered, not out of coldness, but because I wanted to be sure of my own voice before I used it. Renata, what's going on with the trip? His tone had an edge of performance to it, the same one I'd heard the night Denise's message arrived. A man trying to sound reasonable about something he hadn't examined closely. I canceled the parts I'd booked, I said. Denise made it clear I wasn't included in the birthday. I didn't think it made sense for me to keep organizing and funding a family trip I wasn't considered family enough for. There was a long pause on the line, the kind of pause that has weight that you can almost hear the shape of. That's not. She didn't mean it like that. She sent it in writing, Dad. Family only. I read it exactly as it was written. Another pause. I could hear him exhale, the particular exhale of a man who has spent a marriage smoothing things over and has just discovered smoothing has a cost too. I'll talk to her, he said finally, quietly, as if the words themselves embarrassed him. You don't have to do that for my sake. I said, and I meant it. I'm not asking you to fix this, so I'll rebook a vineyard tour. I just needed you to know why the trip fell apart. It fell apart the day she decided which of your children counted. I heard something crack faintly in his voice when he said, I didn't realize you'd feel it that hard. That's the part that hurts most, I told him. That you didn't realize. We didn't resolve anything on that call. I didn't expect to. Some truths don't get repaired in a single conversation. They get acknowledged, and then you wait to see what someone does with the acknowledgement. I said goodnight gently, without cruelty, and put the phone down on the counter, where it sat quiet and dark for the rest of the evening, the first honest silence between us in years. The days that followed had a strange, suspended quality, like the stillness after a window breaks, before anyone sweeps up the glass, when everyone is just standing there, staring at the shape of what happened. Colette called me on the 4th day. She had spoken to my father, she said carefully, and to Denise, and she wanted to hear it from me directly rather than in fragments. I told her the truth, plainly, without embellishment, the text, the wording, the years underneath it that had made that one message land the way it did. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something I hadn't expected. You know, I always wondered why you sat at the end of the table. It undid something in me, hearing that. Not because it changed anything, but because it meant I hadn't imagined it. Someone else had seen the pattern too, and simply hadn't known what to do with the seeing. The way you notice a crack in a ceiling and tell yourself it's probably nothing structural. I'm not trying to blow up the family, I told her. I just couldn't keep paying for a seat I wasn't being offered. I understand, she said. I really do. Word moves through families the way water moves through soil, slow, invisible, until suddenly the ground gives a little under everyone's feet. By the following week, I learned secondhand that Denise had told my father the whole trip cancellation was an overreaction, and that my father, for what I believe was the first time in their marriage, had told her she was wrong. I don't know exactly what was said between them. I wasn't there, and I've made a kind of peace with not needing every detail. What I know is that the birthday, small and quiet as Denise had wanted it, happened without a rebuilt Portugal trip to replace it, and without me, and that this time the absence wasn't something Denise had engineered quietly behind a text message. It was something everyone in that room had to sit with, visibly at the table for the length of an entire dinner. I spent that evening at my own apartment, cooking a meal for one. The window opened to early autumn air, and I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that too. I felt tired in the particular way that comes after finally putting down something heavy you've been carrying so long you forgot it had weight. Grief and relief, it turns out, can occupy the same evening. I let them both stay. My father came to see me 2 weeks later, alone, without calling first, which was, for him, an enormous departure from habit. He stood in my doorway looking older than I remembered, the kind of older that isn't about years but about the sudden visibility of things a person has been holding in for a long time. "Can I come in?" he asked, and I stepped aside. We sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd once spread out property confirmations for a coastal house in Abydos. He looked at his hands for a while before he spoke. "I've been going back over things," he said. "The Christmases. The seating at Theo's wedding. Your graduation." He said each one carefully, like items on a list he'd made himself sit down and write. I told myself for years they were small. I think I told myself that because it was easier than admitting I let them happen. I didn't rush to comfort him. I had spent so much of my life rushing to comfort the people who hurt me, smoothing the moment over before anyone had to sit in the discomfort of it. This time, I let the discomfort exist between us, unhurried, because I think both of us needed to actually feel its size. "I'm not asking you to choose between us," I said finally. "I'm asking you to stop pretending there's nothing to choose between." He nodded slowly. "Denise and we're talking. Really talking for once." He paused. "I don't know exactly where it goes. But I told her that if it ever comes down to a choice between her comfort and my daughter's place in this family, I already know which way I'm going." I felt something in my chest loosen, not fully, not all at once. Old wounds don't close just because someone finally names them, but enough that I could breathe around it differently. "I'm not going to rebuild the Portugal trip," I told him. "Not this year. Maybe not for a while. It isn't about punishing anyone anymore. I just need to know the next trip I build. I'm building it because I actually have a seat, not because I'm hoping to earn one." "That's fair," he said quietly. "That's more than fair." We sat a while longer, not solving anything else, just being two people who had finally stopped performing ease for each other. Before he left, he hugged me at the door, longer than he had in years, and said, "I'm sorry it took losing $40,000 of vineyard tours for me to see it." I almost laughed. "Cheaper than therapy," I said, and for the first time in weeks, he actually smiled. Autumn moved into winter, the way it does, without asking permission. I didn't hear much from Denise directly. A stiff, formal text near the holidays, wishing me well, which I answered with the same brief courtesy she'd once used on me. Neither of us pretended it was warmth. It was simply two people acknowledging that the war, if it had ever truly been a war, was over, and what remained was just the long, unglamorous work of two women learning to share a family without either one disappearing from it. My father called more often that winter than he had in years, not with news, not with requests, just to talk. The way I imagine a father who had let too much silence build between himself and his daughter might finally begin the slow labor of chipping through it. I thought often about the trip that never happened. The vineyard afternoon, the boat past the cliffs at Nazar, the coastal light I'd researched so carefully in photographs online, imagining all of us there together, healed by geography the way people sometimes hope distance and scenery can heal what proximity and habit never did. I don't regret canceling it. I want to say that clearly, because I think there's a version of this story where a woman looks back and wishes she'd simply endured, kept the peace, gone to Portugal, and smiled through it for the sake of everyone else's comfort. That isn't the story. I think if I had gone, I would have spent 10 days on a beautiful coastline quietly disappearing, the way I had been quietly disappearing for years, and no one would have noticed because I had trained them not to notice by never once making my absence cost anything. Canceling that trip was the first time my absence had a price attached to it. $40,000, a birthday nobody enjoyed the way they'd hoped, a marriage that had to sit with an uncomfortable truth at its own dinner table. I didn't do it out of cruelty. I did it because I had finally understood that the only leverage silence gives you is the leverage to keep disappearing. Colette called me in December to say she and Theo were planning a smaller trip in the spring, just the two of them, and if I wanted me. No stepmother, no performance, no seating charts decided for the photographs. Just people who had actually noticed me sitting at the end of the table, choosing, this time, to sit there with me instead. I said yes before she'd even finished the invitation. Spring came early that year, the way it sometimes does, a softness in the air before the calendar admits it. I stood at my kitchen window one morning with coffee actually warm in my hand, watching the light move the way it had that first terrible Tuesday, except now it didn't feel like a countdown to grief. It just felt like morning. My father and I talk most weeks now. Not perfectly. There are still silences between us that flinch a little, old muscle memory that hasn't fully unlearned itself. But he has started saying my name in sentences where it used to be quietly omitted, correcting people gently at gatherings, choosing, in small, unglamorous ways, to make sure I am counted before anyone has to ask. Denise and I have not become close, and I no longer think we need to be, for either of us to have peace. Some bridges, once burned, are better left as clear water between two shores, not hostile, just honest about the distance. I've made a kind of peace with that honesty. I think in a strange way, so has she. I never got my $40,000 back in full. Some of it, the flights especially, were simply lost to the churn of cancellation fees and individual bookings. I don't think of it as money wasted. I think of it as the cost of finally learning where I actually stood, and I have come to believe that is one of the more valuable things a person can purchase in a lifetime, however painfully it's priced. The spring trip with Colette and Theo was smaller than Portugal would have been. 4 days on the coast of Maine instead of the cliffs of Nazar, lobster rolls instead of vineyard tours, no grand itinerary at all, just 3 people who chose each other without needing a stepmother's permission to do it. I sat at the head of a table for the first time in longer than I could remember, and nobody rearranged the place cards. There's a particular kind of quiet that comes after a long storm finally passes. Not the anxious quiet of waiting for the next one, but the settled quiet of a woman who has stopped bracing. I feel that quiet now, most mornings, standing at my window with the coffee actually staying warm long enough for me to drink it. My name is Renata Voss. I was 27 when I learned that family isn't a guest list someone else gets to write. It's the people who, once they finally see you standing at the end of the table, choose, quietly, permanently, to come and sit beside you instead.